Hi everyone, this is Andi here. So today I'm going to read from Redemption. Redemption is a collection of four short stories that I wrote that are dark fantasy. I'm going to read from the first story and the first scene of the first story. So I hope you guys enjoy. Jay huddled in the corner of the damp cell, trembling as much from the penetrating cold as the stabbing pain consuming his body. He wrapped his arms tightly across his shins, pulling his knees closer to his chest. The thin linen pants issued upon his arrival at the college were now nothing more than a chaotic mass of tattered rags, and he stared at his scrawny legs with mild indifference. After being deprived of proper nutrition and exercise for months, the muscular physique he'd been so proud of achieving was now emaciated beyond recognition. His formerly tanned skin had morphed into a sickly white, and his once neatly trimmed black hair hung in greasy clumps down to his shoulders. Beaten down emotionally and physically, the previously jaunty, robust lad of 16 was dead to him. Soon, even the glorious memories would disappear, leaving him with nothing for company but the withering being he'd become. Sighing, Jay turned his attention to the slime-covered wall and grimaced at the tug of the thin metal collar around his neck. He'd never escape this hell. Like all other pupils of the Maidrock, he'd remain in this god-forsaken cell until the master managed to break him, or he died during one of the attempts. It didn't matter. Neither option was more favorable over the other, but either was preferable to the third. His gaze automatically shifted to his cellmate, Darren. The moment the boy had returned from his morning session, Jay had immediately recognized the vacant look plastered across Darren's face. Soon, the Maidrock would move the boy to a different cell, and he'd join the rest of the pupils living in the same ghost-like state. Please, don't let me end up like him. No more than 9 years of age, Darren had been in the clutches of the Maidrock for 3 days, and the breaking sessions had already taken their toll on the lad. He'd retreated so far within himself that he was forever lost to this world. Aside from his shallow breaths, nothing remained to classify him as living. No thoughts, no emotions, no sensations. A voiceless captive, Darren would do nothing but obediently follow the Maidrock's bidding for the rest of his sad life. And for what? Jay thought in disgust, as he looked into Darren's vacant blue eyes. So he can spend the rest of his long years as a slave of this precious order, a helpless pawn, neither living nor dead. He shook his head in pity. The boy would have been better off if his training had killed him. Jay shivered. He fully understood the insufferable pain which caused so many of the boys to either die or collapse in upon themselves. He'd experienced it twice daily for more than 5 months. There were fleeting moments during many of his sessions when he'd almost suffered Darren's fate, desperately wanting to abandon his fight so he could be free. Somehow, a force deep within managed to overcome the torture. He always survived, only to experience greater agony a few hours later. But such was the life of a pupil of the Maidrock, to endure countless sessions of unimaginable pain, so severe and violent, the magic housed within their bodies swelled in fury and forced them to retaliate against their tutor. Finally broken, devoid of all empathy and compassion, they were ready to join the merciless army of the Maidrock and defend the kingdom of Avania. Dreading the upcoming training with Master Zirog, Jay tugged aimlessly at the collar around his neck. He'd long ago given up any hope of escape. Having a son chosen for the college was considered a high honor by any family. His parents were no exception. Owners of a small farm outside the northern village of Cole, they weren't poor, but they were by no means well off either, earning just enough to allow their ever-growing family to live comfortably. With 10 of their 11 children being girls, such a feat was becoming increasingly difficult to accomplish. Only 5 of Jay's sisters were old enough to do any sort of physical labor. They were stronger than other girls their age, but simply couldn't do the amount of work he and his father managed on a daily basis. Production on their farm remained stagnant, while his mother's near constant state of pregnancy generated another mouth to feed almost every year. The time would soon come when his father's income from the farm wasn't enough, and everyone knew it. Although his parents proclaimed to love all of their children, they clearly favored Jay. Not only was he the lone boy, but he was also the oldest and their first opportunity to acquire some financial relief. Finding a respectable young woman to marry him would bring in much-needed money from her dowry, and with any luck, she'd produce a long line of sons to carry the family name. With strong lads to work the farm, his parents would finally be able to expand the business and accumulate enough money to marry off his oldest sisters. And of course, who could overlook all of the money his future daughter-in-laws would bring to the table when his own sons were old enough to marry? He was his parents' only chance of a better life, and they made no attempt to disguise the fact. The hunt for a suitable bride began the day he turned 14. Over the following 2 years, he'd been introduced to a number of candidates, but none were able to provide quite enough money for his father's liking. None, that is, until he was presented with a special gift for his 16th birthday. The details of the arrangement had been agreed upon the day before, and the marriage scheduled to take place in 4 weeks' time. Everything was fixed. They were allowing him to meet the girl merely out of courtesy, and by girl, he meant child. Juriel, his betrothed, had just turned 9. The announcement made him sick to his stomach. Even now, the memory of his father parading her into the family home like a prized animal made him cringe. Hardly old enough to truly comprehend what was happening, she'd stood before him like a frightened rabbit, her large brown eyes staring up at him in absolute terror. Jay didn't blame her one bit. By the way she flinched when he touched her shoulder, she suspected she'd seen her father beat her mother on numerous occasions, and assumed he'd do the same to her. He'd never dream of doing such a thing, but men like him were few and far between. It would take time for her to trust him, and she probably never would completely. The fear of suffering the wrath of his fist would most likely always lurk in the shadows. Yet, he'd sensed getting beaten wasn't the biggest cause of Juriel's fear. He doubted she understood the details of how a woman became pregnant, but she certainly knew her role as a wife was to bear children. Lots of them. Young as she was, the idea probably scared the shit out of her. Getting her pregnant frightened him as well. Used to what his sisters looked like at the age of 9, Juriel's dainty figure alarmed him. She was short, the top of her hair not even reaching his belly button, and so thin and frail he felt sure the act of giving birth would kill her. Even having him inside her would be terrifyingly painful, and he didn't want to do it. It wasn't right. She was simply too small and too young. Attempting to convince his father Juriel shouldn't get married to anyone would have been a waste of time. While the law prohibited males from marrying before the age of 14, it did no such thing for females. As soon as a girl began menstruating, she was able to bear children, and was therefore able to marry. Her age was irrelevant. He found the practice disgusting. Women weren't to be treated as property, they were to be bought and sold like animals. But no one shared his view. Not even his mother, which didn't really surprise him in the end. She wanted the money from the girl's dowry just as much as her husband. Jay sighed. He should never have brought his concerns before her to begin with. She couldn't have done anything even if she wanted to. The agreement had been made, the price already set, and the papers signed. Only the couple's fathers had authority to nullify the contract upon mutual agreement, and neither one of them had any intention of doing so. Why would they? Juriel's health wasn't immaterial. She was young and able to be married off. It didn't make sense for her parents to continue to spend money and resources on her when they could pay a dowry comparatively smaller and be rid of her. Jay's parents wouldn't care if she died during childbirth. They'd already have used Juriel's dowry to marry off one of his oldest sisters, and if Juriel did die during childbirth, his parents would find him another wife, collecting another dowry in the process. So, he'd resigned himself to his fate and spent the following weeks in misery. until, the day before the wedding, two Maidrock paid his father a visit. Jay hardly had time to comprehend what was happening. One minute he was working in the fields. The next, he stood watching his father sign the documents, legally making him the property of the kingdom. He didn't have the opportunity to say farewell to his mother or sisters before one of the Maidrock fastened a pronged metal collar around his neck and shoved him in the back of a covered wagon. At first, he was so shocked he couldn't believe it was happening, nor could he understand why his father would break the marriage in order to have him schooled by the Maidrock. But during the long journey to the college, the reason became painfully clear. The stipend. Because only boys were trained to become Maidrock, and in order to do so, were taken from their homes, where they were significantly important to a family's financial stability. The kingdom issued the parents a weekly stipend of 30 crowns to compensate for their loss. Since Jay was his parents' only son, their stipend would be almost twice as much. They'd receive payments until his 25th birthday, which would continue even if he died during training. For Jay's marriage to Joriel, his father had accepted a dowry of 200 crowns. With Jay in the hands of the Maidrock, his parents would make that much every month from the stipend alone. With that kind of money, they'd be able to hire a couple of farmhands and marry off their oldest daughters in a few months' time. The business would grow, and if all went well, they'd become quite wealthy. No, he'd receive no help from his parents. They'd sold him just as they'd sell all 10 of his sisters. He was dead to them. He would never be free. The unexpected sound of a key turning in the rusted lock startled him. Yanked from his musings, Jay sank further into the shadows. Surely it wasn't time for his afternoon session. He peered intently through the dim light, warily following the intruder's movements across the tiny cell. Silence engulfed the room as the pounding of the Maidrock's boots against the stone floor abruptly ceased. The man stood in front of Daron, gazing down upon the boy in utter disgust. Without a word, he raised his arm, directing the palm of his hand toward the hapless child. A devilish beam of red light emanated from the man's fingertips, and his power flowed directly into the boy's metal collar. Daron's mouth opened in a silent scream. The metal band turned a fiery orange and cast wicked shadows around the cramped room. Jay gagged from the stench of burning flesh as the blazing metal seared Daron's neck, branding him a slave of the Maidrock. Excruciating moments passed before the collar finally returned to its normal, dull silver finish. Daron collapsed in a heap on the floor. His head hit the stone with a sickening thud. Calmly, the Maidrock reached for the collar. A soft click resounded through the cell as the metal band fell away, revealing a ghastly ring of bleeding blisters on the child's skin. Without saying a word, the man grabbed Daron's hair and forced him to stand. Jay looked on in utter despair, while Daron was violently shoved outside the cell. The heavy door banged shut, and the room once again plummeted into darkness, leaving him alone with only his thoughts for company. Crying, he buried his face in his hands. Please, let me die first. So that was the first scene of the first story in Redemption. I will put the links below. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo. So I will put all those links below if you're interested in picking up a copy. If you liked the video, please like below, subscribe to my channel. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!